The millionaire handed out 4 unlimited credit cards to 4 women, but the black maid surprised him. Daniel Mendoza was 52 that year, and financial magazines described him in numbers and graphs. But the real man behind those headlines was simply someone who had been divorced 3 times, had gone through enough relationships to feel on many nights like nothing more than a walking ATM. He had $3 billion on paper houses, far larger than any family could need walls covered with so much art. He needed someone to keep inventory cars that each had a reason to exist, though most of those reasons came down to habit. Yet none of it answered a simple question. Was there still a woman who loved him for who he was, not for what came with his name? On a clear morning in Greenwich, Connecticut, after walking through his mansion like a night guard patrolling a museum, Daniel decided to conduct an experiment. He invited 4 women to his estate that afternoon. Carmen Reed, 35, a fashion designer with a glass-walled studio in Soho, skilled at persuading clients and herself that glamour was an asset. Paige Lawson, 40, an international lawyer trained at Oxford, adept at cross-border deals, fluent in clauses smaller than a fingernail, yet powerful enough to redirect a ship. Lucy Martin, 25, a model and influencer with 2 million followers, turning frames into income and income into destinations. And Ava Johnson, his black maid who had worked for Daniel for a year, steady, precise, up before dawn, making coffee just right, keeping a mansion warm and orderly, though it had never learned warmth itself. Ava's parents lived in Detroit. Her mother needed heart surgery. Her 2 younger brothers were in community college, and her list of priorities was so clear it didn't need to be written down. At exactly 4 p.m., the Grand Hall's chandelier cast light across polished hardwood contemporary paintings hung beside black-and-white Manhattan photography. A stone fireplace framed the room, and glass doors looked out onto manicured lawns. The 3 dates sat on velvet sofas in distinct styles, Carmen adjusting her sleeve like a fitting room mirror, Paige laying her phone face down like a woman who knew how to close a deal, Lucy angling toward the front camera as if testing the light. Ava stood slightly back, hands clasped, eyes unfixed. Daniel entered carrying a silver tray with 4 black cards, the kind you couldn't apply for the kind made of metal that rang differently on a table. He announced 24 hours, no limits, no questions, no accounting. He left the words hanging like setting a countdown clock in the middle of the room. Everyone knew this was more than a gift, it was a measure. Carmen smiled as if Fifth Avenue belonged to her. Paige nodded as if she had just received an open term sheet. Lucy lit up like a freshly filtered frame. Ava hesitated. "Sir, I'm your housekeeper." Daniel replied, same even tone. "For the next 24 hours, you're not my employee. You're Ava. Do whatever you want." For the others, it was a license. For Ava, it was a question of responsibility. The experiment looked simple: 4 cards, 1 day each woman free to spend. But in truth, it tested 3 pressures: money as reagent exposing true priorities, time as force making choices quick and raw, character as specimen impossible to keep pure, if not pure to begin with. Daniel knew spending behavior would answer questions, words could not. He had tried words too many times before. This time he measured actions. When they left the estate, the 4 carried 4 different emotions. Carmen eager, as if preparing for a runway. Paige calm, as if entering a boardroom. Lucy thrilled, as if hitting a milestone post. Ava shaken, then steady, like someone suddenly handed a power she'd never known, and realizing every decision now wasn't just about spending, but about reshaping order. On the other side, Daniel watched the clock tick down in his mind. He wasn't sure what he was looking for except maybe one reason to believe. And sometimes belief doesn't come from logic. It comes from the right receipt at the right time. Carmen Reed started with Bulgari on Fifth Avenue as if she'd walked that path 100 times. She picked out a diamond set worth around $200. Ows added a $45,000 watch to mark the occasion, a line that sounded like a caption, waiting to be typed under a photo scheduled for the right moment. At Hermes on Madison Avenue, she secured 3 different colored Kelly bags, $150,000, the kind with a waiting list that salespeople only smile at for a select few. 2 ateliers took orders for 5 custom evening gowns, $75,000 each, dress already imagined as a future night. On her way back, the Porsche showroom delivered a white Cayenne, $120,000, an exclamation point. Estimated total $590,000. Carmen spent money as someone curating her own image, every purchase a message for rooms where glances carry value. For her money, the luxurious version of herself. Polishing the aura was the goal, and aura could be weighed in carats, bag names, and car models. Paige Lawson entered the game with a spreadsheet. She treated the card as an uncapped term sheet, the 24 hours as a transaction window. By noon, she closed an offer on an Upper East Side condo, $200,000 corner unit, southeast light, small but sufficient balcony management fees, consistent with the neighborhood standard. That afternoon, Tiffany & Co. was a 3-carat ring, natural pearl earrings, an emerald necklace, $300, in dollars, not jewelry to flaunt, but assets easy to price, easy to liquidate. By evening, she wired $250,000 into a seed-stage startup after 3 quick calls, a deck over email, and more faith in the team than the product. Estimated total $250,000. For Paige money, leverage. Every decision was a position. Every position an option on the future. She wasn't buying joy, she was buying possibility. Lucy Martin turned her 24 hours into a highlight reel for her audience. Quick cuts, Gucci, Prada, Versace, 18 bags, 30 pairs of shoes, 40 dresses lined up like a wall of color. Louis Vuitton limited edition luggage set perfect for an airport scene in the 3rd shot. A month-long suite booking at the Plaza, deposit $60,000, where chandeliers would reflect in mirrored ceilings, just right for the camera. A rooftop party at the Peninsula, with champagne and caviar, $35,000 one night, where music outfits and glances would combine into engagement metrics. A Rolex Daytona, $120,000 one-click buy now. 2 weeks in the Maldives, $85,000 diving videos storyboarded in her head. Estimated total $500,000. For Lucy money, hazard content, receipts were scripts, locations backdrops, every posting a potential like. If one had to draft a temporary moral balance sheet for these 3 orbits, it would read Carmen, chased immediate glamour, visible, tangible assets. Paige pursued asset growth, structured assets and positions. Lucy pursued the crowd's gaze symbolic assets on digital platforms. None broke rules. Each chose by her own logic. But the common thread was that the center of the equation was always the self. They weren't asked to think of others. The card carried no such condition. The 24 hours didn't force them to share. So they didn't. Meanwhile, Ava Johnson parked her old Corolla outside the Greenwich gates, holding the black card like a hot coal. She had never held a card with a limit, had never spent beyond what she earned. And for her, every dollar was a unit of priority. She didn't have a list of stores. She had a list of must-live: her mother's heart surgery, her brother's tuition keeping her parents safe from eviction, something small for the soul. That was when the experiment shifted in nature. Instead of measuring the capacity for indulgence, it began measuring the order of love. And from there, the answer Daniel had been looking for, whether anyone could love him for himself, wouldn't appear in a Fifth Avenue display window, but in a hospital deposit slip, a tuition confirmation email, a prepaid 5-year lease, and a bookstore receipt for $18. Ava Johnson began with life itself. She called a private cardiac center in Detroit, where her mother had been stuck on the public system's waiting list far too long. With a deposit of about $48,000, the surgery was moved up to the following week. The staff member's voice shifted from procedural to warm, saying something Ava would never forget. "You just changed a timeline. A life rescheduled by money." It sounded dry, but it carried a heat beyond words. Money, when placed right, could buy time, and time here meant survival. With life secured, Ava turned to education. She contacted the community colleges in Detroit where her younger brothers studied, cleared their old debts, and prepaid 3 years $36,000. 3 years wasn't just a number. It was a buffer insurance against having to drop out over a surprise bill. With education covered, she turned to shelter. She paid 5 years of rent in advance for her parents' $72,000. 5 years wasn't just a string of months. It was holidays without eviction notices taped to the door. With shelter secured, Ava booked a flight $350 back to Detroit for the next morning. Good news, she thought, had to be spoken in person with arms with eyes. On her way back through Jackson Heights, Ava stopped at a used bookstore. On the clearance cart sat selected poems of Langston Hughes, a poet who had written for her people in words soft enough to soothe and strong enough to last. The seller said $1 was fine. Ava insisted on paying $8. Something for the soul deserved its own receipt. Estimated total $156,368. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He had instructed his security team to track the 4 cards transactions, not to catch mistakes, but to understand. He read the lines Bulgari Hermes Couture Porsche, Condo Tiffany Seed, Gucci Prada, Versace LV Plaza Peninsula, Rolex Maldives. Then he read the others: heart surgery deposit, 3 years of tuition, 5 years of rent budget flight, Langston Hughes 18'd. The tears he hadn't been able to shed for years, he shed that night. Not for sentimentality, but for a structure of priorities finally set right. When power is dropped suddenly into someone's hands, they either amplify the self or shelter their community. Ava chose to shelter, and she didn't preach about it. She executed it in wire transfers. 7 a.m., Jackson Heights. The small apartment door opened. Ava, still in pajamas, eyes swollen from joyful tears. The kitchen held dishes drying on a towel. Family photos of her parents and brothers in Detroit hung on the wall, a plant on the sill. Daniel said he had seen the transactions. Ava froze, fearing she had overspent. Daniel cut in, "You didn't spend too much. You spent too little." He recited the categories like verses in a poem: life, education, shelter, something for the soul. Then he asked, "What do you think of me?" Ava looked at him, no hesitation. "You're lonely." A short answer, but sufficient like a diagnosis that required no further tests. It pierced every excuse Daniel had built across 3 marriages and countless relationships. He dropped to his knees in that small apartment and spoke another short line: "Marry me." Ava replied with precision, "I'm your housekeeper." Daniel answered with the truth he had only just grasped. "You're the only one who sees me as a man, not a wallet." Morally, that moment flipped the experiment. The one who set the rules was now the one examined. Daniel began to believe, not because someone said "I love you," but because the transaction lines had said it for her money. Placed in the right places, gave love a place to stand. Structurally, the Jackson Heights moment was the turning point leading to the next climax, a confrontation over statements back in Greenwich, where the truth would be read aloud beneath chandeliers, not to shame, but to end an experiment and begin a life. The following evening, the Greenwich estate lit up just as before, but the atmosphere was different. At the same hour, the 4 women returned. Carmen Reed walked briskly, her perfume, the familiar scent of fashion weeks. Paige Lawson carried herself with the calm of entering a boardroom. Lucy Martin adjusted her hair in the black mirror of her phone. Ava Johnson sat to Daniel Mendoza's right hand, in hand a slender ring on her finger. Carmen was the first to notice. Her smile vanished the way someone's face does when they receive a contract cancellation email. She asked bluntly, "What's that ring?" Daniel didn't elaborate. "My fiancé." The room went silent, like a fireplace gone cold. No applause, no congratulations. What followed wasn't a celebration. It was a reading of the truth. Daniel held printed statements of the 4 cards arranged in order: Carmen, Paige, Lucy, Ava, like a balance sheet. He walked slowly, spoke clearly. No dramatics, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Carmen Reed Bulgari. Hermes, 5 couture gowns, white. Porsche Cayenne, total about $590,000. Daniel said, "There's nothing wrong with buying joy. But when you held an unlimited card, you saw in it a license for yourself, not an opportunity for anyone else." Paige Lawson, Upper East Side condo, $200,000. Tiffany, $300,000 seed investment, $250,000 total, about $250,000. Daniel said, "Smart strategic. You saw the card as an investment, not a gesture. You multiplied the money, but you didn't multiply the humanity." Lucy Martin Gucci Prada Versace LV limited edition suite at the Plaza. Rooftop at the Peninsula. Rolex Daytona, 2 weeks in the Maldives total, about $500 out of dollars. Daniel said, "You treated the card like every birthday and Christmas rolled into one. You bought attention. But attention passes quickly. Ava Johnson heart surgery deposit for her mother, $48,000 3 years tuition for her brothers, $36,000 5 years rent for her parents, $72,000 budget flight to Detroit, $350 selected poems of Langston Hughes, $18 total, about 156 airs, 368. Daniel said Ava didn't buy glamour. She bought time to live, the chance to learn security under a roof, and a small piece for the soul. At that, emotions erupted. Carmen stood, her voice sharp. "This was a cruel experiment. You gave us hope and then judged us by receipts." Paige crossed her arms, voice cold. "She's a good woman, but we come from different worlds. You can't compare my capital formula to her emotional formula." Lucy's eyes widened, brimming. "I really do love you." Daniel didn't scold, humiliate, or lecture. He answered each directly. "To Carmen, you mattered to me, but not for the right reason. We met in the lights. When the lights went out, there was nothing left. To Paige, I understand capital. I live by it. But the card I gave wasn't a deal. It was a question. You answered with a spreadsheet. Ava answered with the order of love. To Lucy, you love the idea of being Mrs. Mendoza. You love the jet bridge and the Cartier box. You don't love me." Then Daniel announced 2 final points. The accounts had been closed that morning. Everything the 3 bought was still theirs, parting gifts not reclaimed. The experiment was over. The answer had been found. Carmen gathered her bags. Paige gave a polite nod. Lucy turned away to wipe her eyes. They left the mansion on 3 different rhythms: anger, ice, despair. The door closed, the chandelier still shone, but the echoes in the room had changed. Ava turned to Daniel. "Are you sure Daniel didn't ramble? I've been searching in the wrong places for 20 years. Now that I've found it, I won't let go. At this point, the story doesn't avoid the question of fairness. A master set the rules, tracked the spending, defined love. Was that fair? Not entirely. But it revealed a correction. Daniel didn't punish anyone they kept. The goods didn't parade his morality. He admitted his greatest flaw, looking for love in the wrong places, and not daring to believe when quiet kindness appeared. The Jackson Heights moment had turned the experiment back on him. The questioner was questioned. And in this reckoning, Daniel answered not with a speech, but with a decision. In the end, the story's logic is clear. Money is the reagent, time is the pressure, the human heart, the specimen. 3 women let money amplify the self. Ava let money shield the people she loved and saved a fragment for herself. On the practical level, Daniel chose the one who could budget love. On the moral level, he chose the right order of priorities. On the life level, he chose a home with a quiet voice over a museum with a loud echo. News of the engagement stirred Detroit more in a small kitchen than on social media. Ava Johnson's parents had lived long enough with Bills and Winters to know that joy too big often came with doubt. Daniel Mendoza flew to Detroit, no entourage jeans and a white shirt, sitting at the kitchen table, whose wood bore scratches of the years. He recited each expense. Ava had made heart surgery deposit, $48,000, 3 years of tuition, $36,000, 5 years rent, $72,000 plane ticket, $350 Langston Hughes, 18s. He didn't preach, he stated facts. Joe Johnson, Ava's father, looked straight at him. "If you hurt my daughter, I'll come to New York." Daniel answered without evasion. "If that ever happens, get in line. I'll be the first who won't forgive myself." The conversation was short. Trust didn't come from words, but from the way a man stayed steady before a hard question without changing tone. 6 months later, a small church in Brooklyn Heights witnessed a simple wedding. Ava wore her grandmother's dress, altered by a neighborhood tailor. Daniel wore a dark blue suit without flourish. 50 guests, family from Detroit. A few true friends of Daniel's, 1 or 2 colleagues who respected him for how he lived, not how much he owned. No $100 or $1,000 wedding planner. No branded backdrop. No paparazzi. The garden reception in Greenwich Tex-Mex cooked by Daniel's relatives, soul food made by Ava's aunts, a church choir singing just 3 gospel songs, kids running around long tables, adults laughing softly, speaking softly. The house that once felt like a showroom was becoming a home. Bookshelves held Langston Hughes beside Whitman. The kitchen filled with the sound of Sunday pans. The green glow of the oven clock lit the night. In his work, Daniel shifted part of his empire, prioritizing good jobs projects in Detroit, the Mississippi Delta, and South Texas. The principles were clear. Apprenticeships, so young people could learn trades with pay. Child care stipends, so parents didn't have to quit jobs to care for kids. Wages set above the floor, not below. Promotion paths written in plain English, so anyone could read them. Profits didn't soar like in speculation. The P&L looked less shiny, but Daniel's sleep came easier. The story doesn't sugarcoat doing this was harder. Slower earned fewer claps, but it was truer for a man who had learned money must serve love and then extend into responsibility. When Ava told him she was pregnant, Daniel wept over the test stick flashing a pink line. He wasn't ashamed of weakness. He accepted a new privilege to be weak in the right place. They chose Bellevue Hospital, the public hospital of New York City, not as a slogan, but as a life answer. Our child can and should be born where most Americans are born. Joseph Daniel Mendoza arrived on a March morning. His first cry was small but enough. Daniel held him looking at a face with no history yet, and knew the account he had spent half a lifetime trying to fill wasn't in the bank. It was here the weight of a child. 6 months after Joseph's birth at the New York Public Library before the press, Daniel announced he would give away 90% of his fortune, keeping only enough for a decent life. He said plainly, money can't buy happiness. Love can. Beside him, Ava held Joseph. A reporter asked what she thought. She replied simply, "Daniel always had enough to be happy. Now he shares the surplus with those who need it." The Mendoza Johnson Foundation was born not flashy, but working scholarships for first-generation students, STEM and nursing, remembering Ava's mother's heart surgery, re-entry programs tied to real jobs, Pilot affordable housing in Detroit, aimed at keeping families under roofs, not under eviction notices. The story doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with small rhythms, the kitchen lamp glowing warm, the green clock light of the oven, a Langston Hughes book folded at a page marked by fingers, the steady breath of a child through a monitor's hum, a man slicing fruit smiling when no one is watching. The moral is spoken as clearly as the original voice. Money is neither good nor bad on its own. Where we place it exposes the heart. When money serves life, education, shelter, and a small piece for the soul, it is beautiful. When love moves from kitchen to factory to scholarship fund, it endures. When power allows truth to strike at it directly, power finally has the chance to become responsibility. And if there must be one line to close this book in the original tone, happiness isn't bought with numbers. Happiness is paid for by the right order of priorities. There, money is only the flow. People are the source. Money never makes anyone happy by itself. Only the right priorities can turn a cold house into a home life education shelter and a peace for the soul. When power lets truth touch it, it transforms into responsibility just as Daniel and Ava chose. If today you held an unlimited card for 24 hours, what would you prioritize first and why? If this story touched you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.